What's up, everyone? You don't have to use Vercel to host your Next.js or Payload CMS project. You can self-host every part of your application using Dokploy and your own VPS. In this video, I'll show you how to do just that. If you want the code that I use in this video, there's a link to the repo in the description. Now, let's dive in. This video is the second part of a 2-video series. Now, you don't need to go back and watch the first video to understand what we're doing in this tutorial. If you're here in this video, you likely already know why you want to self-host and why you don't want to use Vercel. But if you want to learn how to deploy on a service like Railway, or you want more information about why you might not want to use Vercel, you can go back and watch the other video by going to the link in the description. Let's start with what you need to self-host. It's recommended that your VPS have at least 4 GB of RAM and 2 vCPU cores to self-host a Next.js project. That amounts to about $120 per year worth of hardware from a service like Hetzner. But I can get that for about $60 per year at RackNerd. Both Hetzner and RackNerd have their pros and cons, so do a little bit of research before choosing between the two. For this example, I'll be using RackNerd. If you want to use RackNerd as well, you can use the link in the description to bring you to RackNerd's website. Now, I may be compensated for purchases made from clicking on this link, but there is no extra charge to you. After you click on the link, you'll be able to order a new KVM VPS by simply going to Order Now in whichever VPS you want. So I'm going to select the $55 per year KVM VPS just by clicking Order Now, and you'll go through a checkout process and be able to create a new account. Here, you'll want to make sure that your operating system is something that you're familiar with. I'm just going to choose this Ubuntu 24.0464-bit because I know that that's compatible with what I want. You can, of course, change the location to all of these different locations as well. Once your order is complete, RackNerd will send you an email with all of your login information. You can access your VPS by typing in SSH root at your IP address. So I'm going to pull up the IP address of one of my servers that I've already purchased, and I'm going to write that in, and it'll ask you for a password. So I'm going to paste in the password that is in the RackNerd email. In here, you see all of your information for your new server that you just purchased. Now, initially, that password is included in the email with your login information. You can, of course, change it, but the default password is going to be what's sent to you right away. Once you're SSH'd into your server, you may need to update your server. So I'm going to run superuser do apt update. And so it's going to run through all of these updates. Now this command is going to download a bunch of stuff, but it's not going to install anything. This next step isn't required, but if you want to see what will be upgraded, you can just type in apt list _ to flag upgradable. And you'll see all of these packages are upgradable. And on first boot, you could do superuser do apt upgrade to do this in an incremental path, or you can just upgrade everything by doing full upgrade, which is what I'll do here. And then I'll hit continue. And then here it's going to ask what should be restarted, and I'll just hit OK to restart everything. And here I see no containers need to be restarted. And now I can run superuser do apt auto remove and flag purge to make sure that anything that I don't need in the VPS is cleared. And now we'll hit yes to continue. And now some disk space has been freed. And now we can install Dokploy. And so if you go to dokploy.com, there is this installation script right here. So I can just copy this and paste it over. I'm still in my server here. And so I will add curl SSL and then the install script for Dokploy. Now I already have Dokploy installed on this VPS, and so I see that something is already running on port 80. But simply running this install script is all you need to install Dokploy onto your VPS. Now I can go to my VPS IP address 3000, and I can see the Dokploy user interface show up. We'll come back to this dashboard in just a minute. Since you're not relying on another company to handle your project for you, there are a few things you should consider when self-hosting. First, consider having just one VPS for your dashboard. This allows you to still have access to your apps if your primary VPS gets overloaded. Now, the only times I've noticed that my apps have been overloaded is when my projects are in the build phase. When your VPS gets overloaded, what can happen sometimes is all of your apps are inaccessible, and that includes your Dokploy UI. So if everything, including the Dokploy UI, is inaccessible, you're not able to go in and stop the problem app to make sure that all of your other apps are running smoothly. So to avoid the stress and the headaches, I do recommend that you have one instance for just your Dokploy UI and then connect the rest of your apps using SSH in the Dokploy user interface. I won't go over that in this video, but the documentation for both Dokploy and Coolify are very clear in how to do this. But if you do want to see a video of me setting this up, please let me know in the comments. Second, you're responsible for your own security. You need to make sure that your VPS is as secure as possible. You won't be able to rely on another organization to do it for you. It's not too difficult to secure your own VPS though. Here are a few steps you can follow to make sure that your VPS is a bit more secure. These are some of the security measures that you should do every time you spin up a new VPS. The first is to create a normal admin user and then disable or disallow root SSH access. It's best practice to disallow anyone from logging in directly to your root user via SSH. The steps we're about to do remove about 90% of automated break-in attempts. So we can add a user by simply running the add user command, and I'm going to add NLV codes as the user. I'll need to enter in a password and then confirm that password. And then I'm just going to enter for the default of all of these options and then say, yes, that's correct. Now we can modify that user and append them to the group superuser do NLV codes and hit enter. Now, what this did is it allows the user NLV codes to have the proper administrative access to do everything that the root user can do. This just grants this user the permission to do the administrative things that it needs to do to operate within the server. However, this user does not have higher access than the root user. The A flag here stands for append, so it adds the person to the group superuser do. Now we need to copy our SSH ID. So I have SSH copy ID and I'll do NLV codes. And then we're going to put in our server IP address again. And then I need to input my password, and I can see that number of keys added 1, and I should be able to log in to my server using my NLV codes. So I'm going to go ahead and exit, and then SSH again with NLV codes at my VPS IP address. And then I will log in with my password. Now here I'm logged in as NLV codes to my RackNerd server. And here it reminds me I can run a command as the root user using the superuser do command. So this is telling me that I have access to the superuser do group. Now we want to disallow the ability to log into the root. So I can do that by running superuser do nano etc ssh sshd underscore config. And then I need to enter my password. And now here I see all of this code here that I can adjust. For example, permit root login. I can change this to no. Now, normally you would find this password authentication option and set it to no to only allow key-based authentication. But for simplicity for this example, I'm going to leave it as the default yes. Now I can press Control X and then Y to save, and then press Enter to save to that file. Now we need to apply these changes by running superuser do, and we're going to restart the systemctl process and restart sshd and enter the password. Now if I exit and then SSH into my root, I should be rejected. Here it says permission denied, please try again, even though I'm entering the password in correctly. So now I'm no longer able to access my root user via SSH because of the password. But I'll log back in to my NLV codes and move on. Now, next step is installing a firewall. Normally this is installed automatically, so I'm going to run this, but it may already exist. And it looks like it already existed, so nothing was installed and nothing was upgraded. But now we can do superuser do UFW default. We're going to deny everything incoming, and we're going to allow by default everything outgoing. We'll also allow our open SSH, which is port 22. And it looks like that this is already an existing rule, so we're all good there. Now we're going to serve a few things out of this VPS, and the first one is going to be our port 3000. So I will allow port 3000, and this is just the default rule for web development. I'm also going to do allow for 443 TCP, which is for HTTPS. Then we will allow a non-traditional Mongo port, and I'll explain why here in a minute. So I'm just typing in some numbers. And then one more, we will just enable our new rules. It'll say that it may disconnect existing SSH connections, but that's okay, so we'll proceed. And now I can see that the firewall is active and enabled on system startup. To confirm all of this worked, I will check the status and have it log verbose. And here I can see that 443, 2280, which is Dokploy, 3000, which again is typical web development. And then I also have my non-traditional MongoDB port. You may want to add something additional here, like port 8000 for internal applications like plausible analytics. For example, you could expose port 8000 here and then use a subdomain like analytics.yourdomain.com to access your plausible analytics dashboard that's self-hosted in Dokploy. As a quick note, and why I put in a non-traditional MongoDB port, you never want to expose the default database ports. MongoDB is 27017 and Postgres is 5432. These are easy to guess, and if you leave them exposed to the internet, they can become a security vulnerability. It's more secure to use your database internally than expose it to the internet externally. But if you need internet access to your database, you can expose a non-traditional port like I just did for MongoDB. This makes it harder to guess and less likely to be a security vulnerability. As you saw in the setup, my VPS is on the Ubuntu operating system. There's more you can do to keep yourself secure, of course, but that should be enough to get you started. Now let's get back to Dokploy. Now before we set up Dokploy, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. You also have the option to become a member of my channel. Members receive exclusive perks like early access to some videos. There's a link to become a member in the description. Thank you for your support. Now let's get back to it by setting up Dokploy. As a reminder, we're now at our VPS IP address at port 3000. I've clearly already registered my account, but you'll see something like this when you visit your IP address at port 3000 for the first time. This is your registration screen. You can fill it out and then click register. After you register, you'll see a screen that looks like this. Now you'll probably want to use your own domain to access Dokploy, and you can set that up by going to web server. And here you can enter in your domain. So I could do something like dokploy@nlvcodes.com and change my Let's Encrypt email to be my nlvogel.com email address and set up HTTPS and select my certificate provider and hit save. Of course, now this won't do anything quite yet. I would need to set this up in my DNS provider as well using the server IP address up in your address bar. Once that's done, you'll want to connect your Git provider. So I'll go down to Git and then connect GitHub. Of course, you have other options like GitLab, Bitbucket, and Gitea, but I'll do GitHub. I'm not an organization, but if you are, you can put in your organization name here. And I'm going to create a GitHub app and verify my account and just create the GitHub app name as it is. Create that app. It'll redirect me back here and it'll say action required. We need to click this button next to that. And then I'm going to continue to my NLV codes and select all repositories and install and authorize. So now that's ready to go. Now I need a project to deploy. So I'll exit out of my VPS and then I'm going to navigate to where I keep my tutorial projects, which is in a folder on my desktop in business codes tutorial repos. And then I'm going to run the create script for create payload app, and I'm going to name it Dokploy hosted example, but please name this whatever you want. And then I'm going to pull out the website template using the T flag. It'll ask me what database I want. I'll just choose the default MongoDB. And then I'm going to change directory into my Dokploy hosted example, and then initialize my Git repo. So I'll run git init, git add all the files, and then commit to the initial commit. And now I can open this in WebStorm, so I'll open that up. And now that this project is open, I'm going to push this to my GitHub account, share it on GitHub. I'll make it public so I can share it with you all, and it's going to share to NLV codes. I'll log in, and that should be getting pushed. Successfully shared. This template contains a few variables that we need to adjust. So first we're going to go into the next config, and we're going to remove our next public server here. And instead of this remote patterns, I'm going to paste in this one. And all this is doing is it's creating a host name from the next public server URL, which contains HTTPS. And I'm going to take the actual just domain name of it. And then the protocol is going to be HTTPS. Other than that, this template will come with everything you need to deploy to Dokploy with an external database. While you can use persistent storage from your VPS, I would encourage you to still use something like Cloudflare's R2 for object storage. That way you're not taking all of the storage space from your VPS. With this project created now, I'm going to git add everything and then commit it to our GitHub repository because we adjusted remote patterns. And then I can run git push origin main. Now that that's pushed to GitHub, we can create a new project that we will call Payload CMS example and hit create. Then we'll create a new service and we'll start with the database, which we'll select as MongoDB. I'm going to leave all of these as the default and just change the name to database. Now, feel free to change your default user and your password. In fact, I do encourage you to change those because these are also easy to guess. I will hit create. And after the database is created, I will click into it and then come down to the external port so I can expose it to the internet. And here I need to enter in 27974, which is the port that I used when I set up our firewall. And then I can hit save. And as I save this, this is also going to deploy our MongoDB database. So now we can see that we have an external host connection string, as well as this green dot by the database, indicating that this is now published and ready to go. We'll go back to our project and create a new service called application, and I'll just name it application. And with that created, let's go back to our database and copy the external host string here. Then we'll go over to our application. We're going to go to the environment variables, click on the I icon, and paste into our database URI the string here. And then we need to include a database name, which I will do Dokploy hosted example. And then finally include auth source as admin. We'll also need a payload secret. One is generated for us over in our payload project, so I'll copy that over, and then we can hit save. Back in the general tab, we'll go down to the build type, and I'm going to leave this as Nixpacks. And I'm doing this because I know Nixpacks will just work. You can use Dockerfile if you know how to use it, as well as Railpack, which is from Railway. But we're going to come back up to our provider. Since Nixpacks is chosen by default, I don't need to save this. I can now select my GitHub account, which is the app that we just set up. Then the repository, we're going to have our Dokploy hosted example. And then we need to choose a branch. So if you have multiple branches, you can choose one to deploy from, but I'm just going to choose main. And then I can hit save. So since we came over here and changed our remote patterns to include the split, this is technically undefined and this will break our build. So we're going to generate a domain. So I can just add a domain, and you could use something like custom.com or any other .com, .org, whatever domain you have, and include that as a host here, which will give you instructions on how to set it up in your DNS, which I'll show you here in a moment. But you can also click on this dice to generate a traffic domain. So now that that's created, I can copy this link and then go to the environment variables and then paste the link, make sure that the HTTPS is there. And then we're going to store that in our next public server URL and hit save. And go back to the General tab because we have our environment variables set up, we have our build type set up, and we have our source repository. So now I should be able to hit deploy and hit confirm and see that our deployment has activated and we can see the logs in real time. While that's running, I can show you the custom domain. So if I add a domain and we have custom.com just as an example, we can initialize HTTPS and select Let's Encrypt, hit create. I can see that this question mark icon shows up, which I click on, and it shows me how to make this domain accessible by configuring the DNS records. So you just follow these instructions and you should be able to access your website from this project via your custom domain. So I'll exit out of this, go back to deployments, and we can wait for the logs to complete. All right, so we can see that this deployed successfully, and I can see the green icon show up saying that this is done and indicating that it's running. So if I go to the domain and click, I can see it says the connection is not private, but that's okay. I can show details and visit the website anyway. And I can see that we have our website template deployed. And if I go to admin, I can create my first user here. So I'll do that. And now we have access to our admin dashboard on our own self-hosted Next.js and Payload CMS project. Now, for most cases, this would be enough. You have a fully deployed project that has a database and has everything you need to interact with your Next.js and Payload CMS app. Your VPS is secure, you've got a good firewall, and everything is just in working order. So for most of you, you can just stop right here and have a very good project that is deployed to the internet. In some cases, though, you may not want to have your database exposed to the internet. Since this is your own server, you don't need to worry about ingress and egress costs like you would on a service like Railway. But having an exposed database could be a compliance or a security issue that you need to address. Next.js requires a database connection in order to perform static site generation. But in the case of our self-hosted VPS here, the MongoDB we created is not available at build time. That means we need to bypass that database requirement in the build script, and this is very simple to do. All you need to do is go over to your package.json, and in the build script, we are going to add, at the end of next build, our experimental build mode compile, and then we're going to copy all of this again and paste it. And instead of compile, we're going to also add our generate environment variables. Now let's go over to our database service and remove our external port. So I'm going to remove that and hit save. Then copy our internal connection URL, hop over to our application, go to our environment variables, and then paste it before the table name here, and then save. And now we can push our code again. So I will git add, git commit, adjust build script, and then add git push origin main. And this will cause a redeployment to happen. And assuming everything is configured correctly, this should build just fine as well, which we'll come back and I'll show you the completed build here in a second. But to explain this script a little bit, the experimental build mode compile bypasses the database requirement. If we come over here, I also included this generate environment variable. So when you're using the experimental build mode, Next.js also doesn't have access to your environment variables that are exposed to the public. So anything that's Next public or payload public will not be seen by Next.js right away. In order to fix this and not have them return as undefined, we can, after the compiling takes place, generate those environment variables so they don't come across as undefined. You might be asking, though, doesn't this defeat the purpose of Next.js as a static site generator? Yes and no. While you can't generate static pages during the build phase using this setup, you shouldn't see any performance declines. Incremental static regeneration, on-demand revalidation, and time-based revalidation all work as expected. So if someone visits your site, the first visitor might have a little bit of slowness when loading up the first page, just like any other Next.js site. Every subsequent user, though, will see the cached page as if the entire site had been statically generated. As long as you have a solid caching strategy in place, as well as a CDN, there should be no noticeable difference in performance between this setup and Vercel. In fact, you won't have to deal with the cold starts that you would normally deal with in a serverless environment because you're using a server here. Now to show this off again, we can see that Docker deployed, but we can come up here to where the static generation normally takes place, and we can see that that got skipped completely. And then we generated our environment variables and everything else built correctly. So I can exit this, and we can see now that I have no database exposed to the internet, I can still refresh, and I still have access to everything, even though the database is no longer accessible from the internet. Dokploy is a great tool that allows you to have full control over your project. As long as you secure your server and keep your container clean, it serves as a great replacement for Vercel. There's so much more you can configure within Dokploy as well. You can set up schedules to automatically clean your Dokploy instance. You can configure database backups with S3, and you can provide your team preview deployments for PRs opened up on your project. If you'd like to see more of what you can do with Dokploy, let me know in the comments. Between this video or the video before it, you now have the tools that you need to deploy your project anywhere but Vercel. If you found this video helpful, please like it and share it with others who might also find it useful. Subscribe to my channel so you never miss when I release more content about Payload CMS, Next.js, and more. Also consider becoming a member of my channel. Members receive exclusive perks like early access to some videos, as well as an invite to my private Discord server. There's more information about how to become a member of my channel in the description. If you have suggestions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.